Philosophy can come from a variety of sources. It can take a variety of forms. So Nietzsche was very good at popularizing the aphorism, and Wittgenstein was very good at popularizing the proposition. I call this post-it note philosophy because these are very short summations, very short characterizations, very short, almost aphorisms, if you want to go that far. And they are very short statements and propositions that I've been putting on my wall. So here's kind of the bigger picture. And I've been putting them on my wall to kind of think about the various things that are always on my mind. And so I'll focus on a couple of them because these post-it notes are actually full of a lot of meaning, even though they're very short summations that literally take one sentence. But we'll start by this post-it note, which says, rethink logic. How do I skip from point A to point B? And then there's a line, as you can see. And that's actually a very good question. The post-it notes that I'm going to be talking about came from an intense period, one of mental struggle for me, and where the world kind of felt decentered and destabilized. And it's interesting that I attacked logic when I was in this mindset. And I attacked logic because logic is the thing that seems to ground me in the world. And I was thinking in this moment that logic was actually holding me back. And so basically with this question, I'm thinking about in what ways do I skip from point A to point B, and do that by using logic. So there's this great idea that was brought up by a friend actually, that you can outsource yourself by taking some kind of shortcut. So an example would be using a calculator when you could be doing the math by hand. And I feel like logic, at least I felt in that moment, that logic was a way in which I was skipping from point A to point B and outsourcing myself and using the calculator, so to speak, and preventing myself from actually thinking the way that I want to think and the way that I should be thinking. Which brings up this point. Logic has sublimated thoughts, and A does not equal B. And so, of course, sublimation can be a good thing in the sense that we sublimate our instincts and our impulses into art, for instance. But sublimation can also be bad in the sense that it's a kind of suppression, oppression, and even sublimination of our instincts and our more true self. And so that's kind of what I'm pointing out in this aphorism, if you want to call it, that logic has sublimated my thoughts, logic has supervened my thoughts, logic has overtaken my thoughts, and my thoughts aren't allowed to be natural, and thus A does not equal B. There's also a really interesting one that isn't even set up as a statement, more as a strange mathematical formulation and equation. Thebe equals Hitash, which does not equal logic with the question mark. You're probably wondering what that means. Understand that came at a point in my life that was very intense with me psychologically. But nonetheless, Thebe means wolf in Arabic, and Hatish is a name, and all of this does not equal logic. This doesn't necessarily need to make sense, only insofar as logic is itself illogical, and we try to put everything in this succinct understanding, in this succinct grammatical statement, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's correct. And so this goes to another point. How does a psychotic break always get induced? This was a question that I was asking as I was thinking about the nature of psychosis and what psychosis means and what psychosis is and how difficult psychosis can be to understand, how hard it is for people to control it when they're in that state. And so essentially what I get out of that is why does psychosis become induced, and how does it become induced, and what pushes someone over the edge to be able to think in such a free and yet constrained way? Is essentially, to kind of paraphrase someone like Artie Lang, an antipsychiatrist, or an antipsychiatrist like Saz, does psychosis exist as a way of, or delusion for that matter, does psychosis exist as a way to allow us to engage with our really, really wild impulses? Is that what psychosis is? I'm not sure. But this brings me to my final conclusion: self-reliance on logic, outsourcing your words and thoughts. And this, of course, goes into my idea that logic is itself stifling, but that actually sounds very light. What I'm really trying to say is that logic prevents us from thinking the way that we would normally think. So logic constrains our thought. Logic prevents us from thinking purely. And I think all of this is really, really interesting to think through, to think about the limits of logic and the way that logic limits us, the way that logic prevents us from thinking clearly and understanding what it is we're really, really thinking. This is Post-it Note Philosophy, and I hope to have more installments like this in the future, because as you can see, I have plenty more posts and Post-it notes. Those were simply the Post-it notes that I wrote on the day that I was pretty panicked and having a lot going on in my mind. This is Phoenix, and thanks.